Today on Something's Happening Here, we are continuing our prophetic studies of the book of Daniel, which we'll be doing all week long. And today, specifically, we're looking at Daniel chapter 7. It's a really interesting chapter, and we have to know some of the rules of how to interpret Bible prophecy because there's a lot of symbolism in this chapter. But as we'll see, it's also a pretty direct copy of Daniel chapter 2. So I hope that you will click the link on the bottom or in the description of this intro video so that you can watch the entire show, and then feel free to engage me about it. I would love to talk to you about it, but I do need you to watch the entire show first, and I'm looking at you, Instagram. Thanks for being here. I'm Steve Hicks, Director of Podcast Ministries for Talking Donkey International. Welcome to today's show. All right, welcome back. Happy Tuesday if you're watching this in real time. Brief recap for you in case you missed yesterday's show. By the way, I don't do that. Go back and watch yesterday's show, especially on a week like this week where we are tracking something progressively. You really want to watch the entire episode. So yesterday we looked at an infographic, and you should be able to see it again right now. We are picking it apart because I couldn't find anything in this whole thing that I agreed with from the Bible, and yet it references a number of phrases and symbols from the Bible. So that's why we're going through the book of Daniel. We're trying to pick it apart and rightly learn what these symbols mean scripturally, and therefore make some sense out of this infographic. But in any case, as you're looking at it, you will see that it has a 1,260-day time frame. In fact, it has that twice on both sides of this timeline that it gives you from 2020 to 2027, right? It's 1,260 days and then another 1,260 days. So where did that come from? And I'll tell you, it came really from the book of Revelation, so we'll make sure to go there. But ultimately, it came from the book of Daniel. So we're studying Daniel chapter 7 today to understand what that time frame means. We can quickly start in the book of Revelation just to see, because the time frame shows up with different language in the book of Daniel, even though it's the same time frame. So if you join me in Revelation chapter 12, that is where we're going to see 1,260. You find that in verse 6. It says, "Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days." Now, this is referring to a 3.5-year time frame, which even the infographic seems to understand, because right above the 1,260 days, it says 3.5 years. But if you, like right now, if you were to get your calculator and multiply 365 times 3.5, that's the number of days in a year times 3.5 years, you're not going to come up with 1,260. You're going to come up with a bigger number. So how do I honestly, truthfully tell you that 1,260 days is 3.5 years? And here's how. The ancient Israelites and the ancient Jews had a different calendar than we do. They told time on a lunar calendar, according to the instructions in Genesis chapter 1, right? Because all of the heavenly bodies were given for us to tell time. And so they told time according to the position of the moon. One lunar cycle around the earth, which we call a month, they would also call a month. But they generally understood this to be a 30-day time period. So on their calendar, you see this 30-day mentality in a given month. 30 days times 12 months times 3.5 years is in fact 1,260. And so maybe that's not an exact match from our modern point of view, but from their ancient point of view, it would have worked. It's a 3.5-year period. So turn back to the Old Testament book of Daniel. We are going to really investigate where that comes from, because Revelation is just referencing Daniel. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. I'll read it for you. It says, "He," we don't know who that is yet, but "he shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, and times, and half a time." There you go. That's also 3.5 years. The Hebrew word that is translated into English as time is year. You just look in your Hebrew dictionary, right? It's 1 year. So a time, 1 year, and times, so that's plural, but there's no qualifier. It's not 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So without the qualifier, that's 2. So it's 1 plus 2 and half a time. 1 plus 2 plus a half is 3.5 years. So we are looking for this 3.5 year period during which, according to Daniel 7, the saints, that's God's right people, shall be given into the hand of this persecuting entity for that length of time. So how do we understand this? Well, we started with the assumption that, or the assertion really, that Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are the same thing. They have different words and different levels of detail, but the actual theological content of both of them is the same. And I'll have a little graphic for you at the end of this to demonstrate that. But when we look at the actual text, we see that the prophecy begins really in verse 2 there by describing 4 different beasts, just like there were 4 different metals of Daniel chapter 2. So the first beast here in chapter 7 is a lion that has the wings of an eagle. This is a very common image in ancient Babylon, so it should not surprise us that it refers to ancient Babylon, just like the head of gold did in the statue of chapter 2. Then in verse 5, there's a second beast. That one is a bear, and it is raised up on one side. There's one side that's dominant over the other. And of course, that is the Medo-Persian Empire. Media kind of fell away, and Persia became dominant. So that is equivalent to the chest and arms of silver, the dual chest and arms of silver back in chapter 2. So far, we've got a match. The third beast in chapter 7 is a leopard. It has 4 wings of a bird on its back and also 4 different heads. So an emphasis on the number 4. So the equivalent here would be the belly and thighs of bronze from chapter 2, which represented the Greek Empire, the one that displaced Persia and was later on displaced by Rome. So the history where we get this emphasis on 4 is because after the very first and most powerful king of Greece, Alexander the Great, after he died, there were no acceptable natural heirs to take his place. And so the generals of his army, there were 4 of them, they killed the natural heirs, which I believe was an infant son and a mentally challenged brother. They just killed these people and took the kingdom for themselves, divided it into 4, and then each general took one of those 4 areas of the empire. So it's that emphasis on 4, but that's a match as well. Then chapter 7, starting in verse 7, we read about a 4th beast that is not grounded in any particular animal, although it's usually depicted as a dragon of some sort because it has iron teeth that crush and break and devour everything, and it's so big and monstrous that it just tramples everything with its feet. And so it's often depicted as a dragon or a dragon-like creature. And that would be Rome. That would be the equivalent of Rome, the legs of iron in chapter 2. Then we have a little horn that pops up. This dragon thing has 10 horns on its head, and then an 11th little horn pops up on its head. So just like the feet on the statue have 10 toes, here we've got 10 horns. That 11th one is the Roman Catholic Church. And so therefore, that would be the equivalent of that clay mixed into the feet in the statue in Daniel chapter 2. Now, we can go through a lengthy process of identifying from Daniel 7 all of the different characteristics of this little horn, and there are 10 or 11 of them. We've done this on the show in the past. And when we put all of those characteristics next to each other and we scour the entirety of all human history, we realize there's only one entity that matches every single point, and that is the Roman Catholic Church in its form when it was ruling Europe for the Middle Ages. We can even pinpoint an exact 1,260 year period because, you ready for this? In the year 538 AD, the Pope was kind of granted uncontested authority over Europe. Now, technically, he had been given that authority 5 years prior in 533 AD, but that declaration in 533 by Emperor, I think his name was Justinian, that caused consternation amongst believers who didn't want to be loyal to the Catholic Pope. And so there was a series of wars that happened for 5 years, during which 3 Germanic tribes were wiped off the face of the planet, like a complete genocide of these tribes. And after they were completely gone, there was no more opposition to the Pope. And so in 538 AD, the Pope now has uncontested rule over all of Europe, really. And he continued in that vein for the entire Middle Ages. Some of that time was peaceful, and some of that time was not peaceful. In the 1200s, we begin to see the office of the Inquisition. And so when you behaved in a way that the church didn't like, you could find yourself arrested and interrogated or even killed. And that actually got worse as time went on. But even when Martin Luther and John Calvin and the Protestant Reformation exploded onto the earth, the Catholic Church still had pretty universal authority over Europe. So when did that change? And that changed in the year 1798. In small pieces, it happened for several years leading up to that, all in the context of the French Revolution. But in 1798 is when the general of the French army, his name was Berthier, and he was, I believe, the brother of Napoleon. He took the army down to Italy, stormed the Vatican, and actually took the Pope captive. And so with that, this was France ripping the power of the state away from the church. So after 1798, it was just a church again. Prior to 538, it was just a church. So for this time in the middle, it was a church and an empire at the same time. And if you do the math on that, 1798 minus 538, give you 2 guesses what number that is. It's 1,260. Yeah. And so we can be confident in that because this is something that history matches. It matches the idea that he will be in power, right? Because again, Daniel 7, verse 25 says, the saints shall be given into his hand. That is a phrase that implies power, right? So I have power over this people for a time, times and a half a time, or 1,260 days. Now, you probably have noticed I am talking years. 538 AD to 1798 is years. And yet, this infographic from the false prophecy says days. And actually, that's what Revelation said too, 1,260 days. So, am I being dishonest? How do I go from days to years? And that's actually a really easy question to answer. If you go to the book of Ezekiel chapter 4, we find it all right in one place. Read verses 4, 5, and 6. God is giving instructions to the prophet, and he says, lie also on your left side and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of the days that you lie on it, you shall bear their iniquity. For I have laid on you the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days. So you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. Verse 6 says the same thing. When you have completed them, lie again on your right side. Then you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have laid on you a day for each year. This is a prophetic principle that never goes away. When God gives you a prophetic time frame in terms of days, the right way to understand it is with literal years for each prophetic day. So in the prophecy, we're looking at 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. But it really, like the interpretation of it would be 1,260 literal years. And that is the time frame of the Middle Ages, so to speak. So this was a lot, I know, and there's a lot more we can say. But what I'm trying to set you up to do is to rightly understand all of the pieces of this prophetic infographic that we looked at yesterday and today, so that we can know just how thoroughly wrong it is by the time we're done. There's one 1,260 day/year period in the Bible, not two, just one. And therefore, you should know right away that this infographic is probably on a wrong road. And I'm going to leave you with that for today. Tomorrow, join us again. We're going to look at Daniel chapter 8, and and you'll see when we get there. So you gotta tune in tomorrow. Let's go over how to make that happen as soon as we're done praying. Loving Father, our heads are swimming with a lot of information, so please sort it out. Cause us to go to sleep and sort our thoughts while we're sleeping so we can wake up with a greater level of understanding and a greater desire to learn more about these really powerful prophecies and Jesus Christ who is revealed in them. Bless us in his name. Amen. And to subscribe on Facebook, you just have to like the page where you're watching this, and then you'll be a follower of it. That's nice and easy. On YouTube, that means you found the Talking Donkey International channel. There's also a Steve Hicks channel, but I'd prefer you go to the Talking Donkey one. And wherever you find our programs, you can subscribe to that and also hit your notification bell. On Rumble, you find our channel, hit your follow button. On Locals, love you on Locals. That means you joined our free community there. It works just like Facebook, so join it for free. And consider also becoming a paid supporter. It's a small monthly fee. You get a lot of extra stuff that way. And finally, if you just prefer a web browser experience, you can go to talkingdonkeyinternational.org/podcast and find everything you need there. God bless you, friends. Have a great night's sleep, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.